Hello, welcome to part two. Thank you for joining me. In this part, I'd like to talk about Twitter abuse and free speech, and we'll move on to the abortion issue just after that. Now, I've spoken before about Twitter, and it's an interesting topic, and it's one which I think needs to be tackled and challenged. But I also think that it's something which is looked on in entirely the wrong perspective from most of the people who do so. One has to ask, what is offensive? What does it mean to be offended? Usually it just simply means that you didn't like what someone said. But there's been much made recently of abuse on Twitter, with there being accusations of name calling, public outing, bad tempered comments, and lots of profanity. I've spoken before about the type of interactions that happen on Twitter and how people find a world they are not expecting and in many cases not used to or equipped to deal with. For those used to Facebook, where they can add only the people they want to add, Twitter, with its worldwide open forum structure, can be a shock to the system. I may not look that old, but I was using the internet when it was only available to universities, and even then on BBS, as we call them, or bulletin board services, which are the precursor to chat rooms, there was the most horrendous abuse from absolute strangers, people you'd never met who would call you all sorts. The anonymity, or relative anonymity, offered by the internet seems to bring out both a side of some people and a section of society for whom the concept of being polite to each other simply doesn't enter into their thoughts. They will swear at you, call you names, make suggestions about your genetic heritage, or claim to have had biblical knowledge of one or both of your parents. They may accuse you of being overly fond of children, or being an avid follower of the teachings of Hitler. Perhaps your level of intelligence will be called into question, or even, heaven forfend, you may be told to find some unconventional method of finding carnal knowledge of yourself. But when it does come down to it, what does any of that matter? If you met someone like that in the street or in a pub, would you follow them around and wait for them to say more ridiculous things before telling everyone else who was in earshot what it was they'd said? Now, there are a very small cohort of committed tweeters online who are responsible for most of the tweets that you see advertised, and there's a method by which some of them are obtained. Say a hapless independent supporter will tweet something or retweet some meme, and they end up being needled by, you'll know who I mean, the usual suspects. There is a particular way of being polite while deliberately being condescending in order to elicit an angry response, and that angry response is then retweeted and pounced upon by the rest of the cabal. Oh look, yet another example of a nasty cybernat. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a similarly small number of people on the independent side who insist on using inflammatory language and make references which would make Frankie Boyle wince. They often claim these comments are responses to particularly odious people, but they never seem to consider what those tweets will look like in isolation. The fact that most journalists are just a retweet away means that there's no good insult goes unreported, and even the most insignificant account, some with as few as 70 followers, have made it into the papers by typing something in their bedroom that they didn't consider how it would look splashed on the front page of the Mail. But some people have taken things way too far and started to try and locate or out the more abusive or those perceived to be abusive, even to the extent of posting pictures of houses, spouses, and people in fancy dress. There was a certain horrendously offensive account that was purported to be run by a female, but was in fact run by a middle-aged man. Now, this account was a genuine case of online stalking and nastiness, and I both challenged and blocked the account long before Dr. Paul Monaghan got in trouble for being associated with it. But that individual is now reported to be back on Twitter under the guise of a Scottish butter-based biscuit. Let's try saying that 3 times fast. But the simple fact remains that my call for examples of abusive texts turned up the same names again and again and again on both sides. Human beings will say nasty things to each other when they think they won't get caught. It's that part of your brain that wants to tell your boss that you believe he spends an inordinate amount of time paying particular attention to his own anatomy. But you don't. Yet on Twitter, when it's a stranger, you have less reason not to say the first thing that comes to your head. Now, with my account and anyone who's interacted with me, you'll know that I always seek to debate respectfully where I can, but I'm not innocent, and I have on occasion let the mask slip and said something I shouldn't have and had to apologise for it. But that's a specific choice I make because I want the account to be taken seriously so that I can help to inform you all on no matter what your political bent is. Now, I hate to be sitting here saying that bullying is just going to happen and you're going to have to accept it, but this is the real online world and we can't all have butters creating our safe space for us. Use the block button, mute to your heart's content, and if someone says something that offends you, remember offence is taken, not given. And if you respond, you may well be giving them exactly what they want. If people want to be upset because Bella Caledonia publishes something that isn't completely pro-SNP, then they should be allowed to be and express that. But others should similarly be allowed to point out that we need the press to hold the government to account. It just needs to be done fairly. If you don't trust Bella to do that, then you must have missed the point of the site. But this raises the question of free speech. And another challenge to free speech this week was the planned protest on abortion outside the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which has now been cancelled, or at least told to move on. A petition was circulating online which I was initially sceptical about, as I don't like the idea of banning protests. But the point of the petition was that the protest shouldn't take place at the hospital, and on that basis I signed it. There should absolutely be space given to those who disagree with abortion, and in a free society they should be able to protest. But we wouldn't allow anti-Muslim campaigners to protest outside a mosque and shout at worshippers as they entered. That would rightly be seen as an undue intimidation, and there is no reason why a group should be allowed to protest anywhere near a hospital on the grounds that they could be a hindrance to medical staff doing their jobs, never mind the emotional trauma they inflict on women going through a difficult and private grief. No woman ever reaches the decision to have an abortion lightly, and that decision stays with them their entire lives. The idea that a group of people should be able to harass you while you're in the process of stepping into the hospital is horrific. Where they should be protesting is at the Scottish Parliament, because the competency for abortion is due to be devolved in the upcoming Scotland Act. Some may have questioned the need to do this, and some have even raised scare stories of Scotland being a parochial backwater that will recede to the medieval times and ban abortion. This is not only ridiculous and offensive, it shows a stunning lack of knowledge on the position of the legality of abortion in Scotland prior to Westminster legislation being implemented in 1967. It's commonly held that this act legalised abortion, but in fact it did no such thing. It is also a common misconception, if you'll forgive the ironic language, that abortion is a right in the United Kingdom. It isn't. In order to properly assess the devolution of abortion law to Scotland, we need to get a few bits of background. Firstly, prior to 1967, abortion was a recognised crime in Scotland, but only when performed by someone other than a registered physician. It was carried out perfectly legally, and no successful prosecutions were brought against Scottish medical professionals for carrying out physician-led abortions. There was one conviction, which came from a guilty plea, where the person who was being prosecuted refused to claim their innocence and in fact took a guilty plea. This did not allow the courts to decide whether or not they had committed a criminal act, therefore no criminality took place. And this was in regards to performing a home abortion, and the very point of that exercise was because the physician hadn't taken the abortion into a medical environment but had instead done it at home. Now, it was common practice for a doctor to seek a second opinion, but there was no codified requirement to do so. And although there are criteria for a doctor agreeing to the procedure were broadly similar to those in law today, the reasons for which I'll discuss in a moment, they were by definition more broadly applicable in view of the very fact they had not been stipulated in law. It is recognised that doctors would extend their definition of health of the patient to social and economic factors, but it should also be noted that access to abortion in Scotland, although legal in the given conditions, was often dependent on geographical location. In Glasgow there was a large minority Catholic community who would seek to dissuade women from aborting through persuasion and other more nefarious means. In fact, one doctor felt it appropriate to insist women be shown an ultrasound of the fetus before being allowed to make the decision. In Aberdeen, however, under the supervision of Sir Dougal Baird, a moderniser and libertarian in respective attitudes to abortion, more pro-abortion doctors joined the faculty through his influence. He was also influential in the design of the 1967 Act and spoke with the now Sir David Steele regarding the position in Scotland. Indeed, the 1967 Act in effect puts into statute the position which Scotland already held, and he is attributed with being responsible for the social clause being included. But unfortunately, the drafters of the bill did not take the necessary care to apply the law to the unique and separate Scottish law system, instead relying on English legislation. This meant that even if a Scottish doctor had carried out an abortion without seeking the supposedly necessary secondary opinion, or indeed even after the 24-week term limit, the chances of bringing a successful conviction would have been extremely low. The law is there not to confer a right on women or to legalise abortion, but to protect doctors from prosecution by providing a framework upon which a decision to abort can be made. Those who oppose the devolution of abortion law therefore completely misunderstand Scotland's historical attitudes to the practice, but they also clearly miss the general view that's prevalent in Scotland today. Many have said that they don't want the law to be altered, but a recent online poll I ran showed an overwhelming majority for the view that the ultimate decision to abort should be that of the woman, not the physician. A physician should perhaps be allowed to refuse to carry out the procedure themselves on moral grounds, but they should also have a legal obligation to refer the patient to a doctor who will. In many countries in Europe, abortion is available on request, but the official position of the United Kingdom is that it is only available if the health of the mother or the baby is at risk, or if social factors mean it is medically appropriate. It is effectively available on request at the moment, but there is no legal human right for women to get one, and I contend that we need to change that and place the focus of the law squarely on the rights and wishes of women whose bodies are their own and whose decisions are not ours to question. The only questions that should be asked are you sure, and do you want to talk to a counsellor about it? The idea that just because Scotland has a history of church influence in politics means that it was going to be some parochial backwater is completely nonsensical and offensive, and I feel that Scotland is more than mature enough to decide its own abortion laws. Now, the next thing we're going to cover is college places, and I'm sure you'll all be interested in that one, so join me tomorrow for an in-depth view of that. And as for now, thank you very much. Have a good night.